Yeah, so.
The unequal distribution of property.
Yes, the uneven distribution of property will be the biggest cause of faction. Very good, meaning class. So there's going to be two parties. One party with property, one party with very little or no property. And which party will be bigger? A lot bigger, like 10 to 1. That's what he thought. If there's a democracy and then they could divide up, who will win? And which party would Madison have been in? We're talking self-interest now. Which party would Madison have been in? He was a wealthy guy.
Yeah, he would have been in the urban rules property.
That's what his thought was. I'm a big property owner. I'm wealthy. Yeah. And we won't have that problem. So who will be protected in this form of government?
Well,
Meaning people like us. We won't have it broken up on party, and therefore we'll be protected. Now, he would argue that's what's best for the country. We know how to create wealth, and that's the best system. Whether that's sincere or not, we don't know. But that's what he would have said. But there's also something else. Who's the smartest? Who's the most patriotic people? People like... In fact, Madison's like the perfect person. He would be running the government and be protected. Now, by me saying that, without changing anyone's answer for number 3, don't tell me. Like, I might have altered it a little bit. He's really thinking about that. We must protect the minority. And who's the minority? People like him. Five, 4, anywhere from 900 to 100 pounds. He's our smallest president. Okay, that's another little bit of trivia that's meaningless, but it fit in, yes.
So, like, is that like more like actors trying to like self and I guess we say that for class?
That's a really good question because a lot of that depends on your point of view about his goals. You know, I can't tell you about what's your morality. And couldn't sometimes you have the point of view of having, yeah, it's going to directly affect me and help me, but at the same time, I think it's best for everyone else. I mean, Madison truly felt that people like him were the smartest and the best people. Can you believe that? Shouldn't those people be in power? So then it becomes, there's no yes or no answer, isn't there? Yeah, there's a lot of greed there, but is that necessarily bad? Then you got to get down to the motivations and what they do. By the way, Madison then therefore thought people like him, all these like-minded people will come together and we will do what's best. How long do you suppose it took Madison to realize, okay, people elite like me, we might not always disagree. And some of those people are truly horrible people. How long do you suppose it took him to realize that? Hours, maybe? Like, for example, he realized one of his closest allies to get the Constitution ratified. Madison would later find out, Madison would decide, is a truly horrible person. Alexander Hamilton. Oh my God, he's horrible. But that's what he's thinking. But don't forget, he's telling the people in the New York State Assembly. What kind of people make up the New York State Assembly? Aren't they kind of relatively like Madison? So he's telling them, I will protect you from scary things like Shays' rebellion. And there's also one more thing. Did he 100% believe this? We'll never know for sure, but he was more than willing to use this as a weapon to get what he wanted done. That tells you a lot about him. He is willing to use things, even if he thinks they're a little bit duplicitous, to get things done. So, any other questions? Yeah, Madison they're interesting people. But it's amazing how many people will read these documents and honestly believe that these were written as like what they thought the Constitution would do, when they totally do not understand the history. No, these are propaganda. Propaganda, what are you trying to do? Convince people your point of view, so you're, by definition, mislead. I should add, I could be using propaganda against you, but I'm not very good at it because I keep on telling you I'm using propaganda. Which is the perfect way to use it, isn't it? All right, where did we quit yesterday? We'll come back to, did we get to here?
Yes.
Oh, Massachusetts and then the Delaware. I got my broom out. Have I told you the broom story?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm still hoping they'll move. Actually, it moved. It was here the other day. And then it moved back here. I'm still waiting to see. Someday they'll take their broom, but my guess is I'll retire them. So we got here, Massachusetts, and did we get to, oh, talk about the money supply, what a big deal that was. Creditors, I'm getting this right now. I know I mean creditors this time. Do they want inflationary policies or deflationary policies? Which one?
Deflation.
Yeah, deflationary. Because they'll get money back from debtors of what? Greater value. And don't think in terms about the amount. Think about what that money can buy. That's the big thing. And so talk all about the money supply, all those issues. I'll ask you a few more questions. Oh, remember the bonds? So we got these small farmers out in the middle of the frontier. They can't pay back their debt. They were paid with bonds. They had no money, had to pay back their debts. What did they do with these bonds? To whom? Yeah, speculators. I know it's a word that, by the way, speculators. Could those people be the very same people meeting in Philadelphia in 2 years to decide the Constitution? No, it couldn't be. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, doesn't mean it's good, but people have complex motives out there. Here we only care about good, correct? Good and justice. Yeah, there's people, yeah, sure. Back after their test. All right, so with that, so we got Massachusetts. Is that where we quit right here? I love this piece of currency. They put the hole in so you can't use it anymore. I just think that's really funny. I had to find my old passport for a different reason, and they put a hole in it, so they can't sell it to somebody else. So $7. Imagine a $7 bill. That seems so weird. So with that, so they limited currency. What they did is they're not going to print that much currency, distribute it, exchange. The big thing they would do is exchange currency for specie. Remember, specie is hard money, gold and silver. And they also said that land taxes, today we would call land taxes property taxes. They're required only in specie. That means there's very little hard currency out there, and they demanded you pay it in specie, and then they would distribute limited currency. So what that meant is you had to have specie. So this hammered people without wealth, meaning the vast majority of people, especially veterans and farmers along the frontier. And so they had conscious deflationary programs. So they were gutting small farmers. I mean, this is a conscious policy by the government of Massachusetts. You know, this isn't the sun came up and farmers were hammered. Okay, farmers have a very difficult job, so it's kind of like that. But it's even more hammered than normal. So I talked a little bit about debt, and I mentioned about college loans. Yesterday, didn't I talk a little bit about that? That's a conscious policy to make you guys pay more. That is done by the government, those who run the government. That's conscious. They're going to turn the cost onto you that you'll pay for the rest of your life, so you have to take a loan out. So that's politics, is the point. Now, politics can be changed, but that's politics. And that's what this is. Let's look at another state, Rhode Island. Don't forget, things don't happen in a vacuum. These are conscious policies. So, Rhode Island. Rhode Island, on the other hand, they distributed lots of currency. They collected taxes in currency, including a wealth tax. Now, property taxes in a way are wealth tax, especially back then, property was your biggest wealth, but it focused on, it was a progressive scale, meaning the more wealth you have, the higher tax you paid. And they collected in currency. Thus, distributing more currency, meaning they had inflationary programs. Two states right next to each other. It also shows how complex this was. I mean, these are radically different states, different points of view. And so we have to get to this. Which state allowed more people to vote? Another term for this is giving people the right to suffrage or the franchise. Those are two more terms for the right to vote, suffrage or franchise. I know you're thinking, okay, this is 1786, but this directly affects today. Who allowed more people to vote? Which one had a greater voice? Or another way to look at it is which one had more democracy? It's not a full democracy, but which one had more? Yeah. Rhode Island allowed more people to vote. Debtors voted for people who would support their policies that would help debtors. Now, I should add, I'm not saying most of the time, but a significant amount of the time, maybe it is most, people don't necessarily vote in their own self-interest. You know, they vote for cultural reasons, or they vote for, I just don't like the way that person looks, or they have a, you know, I'm on this team, so I'll vote against that team, or that kind of thing. But here, that's what's happening. Remember what I told you. Who's ever in charge of the country or the state, you always know who they are by the money supply. Always. So what does that tell you about creditors and their feelings towards democracy? No, we don't like that. We don't like that. And that's pretty common. Those who have more wealth don't like democracy because it might equalize, or the term they would have used then is leveling. And we'll see this time after time. So when Andrew Jackson and the Democratic movement in the United States, what we call democracy, would start around Andrew Jackson. Talk about a complex character in American history. The wealthy elite would form a party opposed called the Whig, just simply the anti-democratic party. And so, Rhode Island, we have regular people as debtors, and they're the ones who vote. And so this gets to a term that will start to be used at this time. And like I said, conservative and liberal are misused all the time today, all the time. And a lot of people say, I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative, it's like their team. And part of the reason why these terms are almost meaningless now, I would argue. But better? Better? Is that better? She's in the middle of this box. See? Everything's simplified. So, conservative and liberal. So the term liberal, as I mentioned before, came out of the Enlightenment, and it comes from liberty, and basically meaning more people with rights. Conservative is going to come as a reaction to the Enlightenment, and that term, which the roots of it exist today, even though, like I said, it's all kind of skewed, came out of anti-liberalism, which came out of the French Revolution. A guy named Edmund Burke wrote against the French Revolution, said, how dare these regular people think they have rights? And so that's where they came out, conservative or liberal. So the roots of the terms used today, even though they're misused all the time, came out of this very era. These 10 or 15 years right here. It's greater suffrage, or conservative or liberal, using the classical terminology of these terms. Yeah, that's a liberal one. And conservatives, conservative idea would be to mimic that. Yeah.
Can you repeat the list?
Say it again.
Can you repeat what the liberal are?
Liberal would mean this, now we're coming out of the Enlightenment. The term liberal meant more liberty, meaning we should have more rights, those unalienable rights for people. And conservative was the idea of basically conserving the old order of a hierarchy. This comes from Edmund Burke, who first used the term conservative, writing against the evil French Revolution, which it did dissolve into a little bit of evil, if you know anything about the French Revolution. So with that, this also gets to right or left. And right or left might be a little more accurate, but usually people say more conservative, more right, more liberal, more left. And same deal. More voting is more left. By the way, do you know where right and left came from? You probably heard those terms. You know where they came from? You know? Oh, anyone know? The French Revolution! Everything seems to come from the French Revolution. It's amazing how the French influence everything. And who's had snail? See? Am I the only one who's had snail? You guys are pretty good, aren't they? No, they're not. You ever had clams? It's the same thing.
Snail?
You've never had it. Oh, you have? They're good. Tastes just like snail. So, why the French Revolution? Okay, here's the thing. Here's a little history. You ready for a little lesson in history? Medieval Europe. You have a line of men at war advancing towards the enemy. Most people are right-handed, correct? If you have a line, there's just somebody walking and they're right-handed, what do they start to do if it, on an open field, just walking? What do they do if they're walking and they're right-handed? They start to drift to the right. It's just natural. You drift towards your dominant hand. So if you have a whole line, what's going to happen? It's going to start moving, isn't it? And so what the king would do, the warrior king, would put their best man on the right-hand side. So they would go straight and make sure the line would go straight. So the king's right-hand man would be here. That's where that term comes from, the right-hand man. By the way, if you say, why not put a left-handed person there? Left-handed people are possessed by the devil. And we all know that, correct? I mean, that's just so obvious. My brother has is left-handed, and that's all I gotta say. Who's left-handed? See, you admit it. But, yeah, actually, I still just have a left hand on your back, and you have to know how to right-handed. That was up to the 1960s, which is not that long ago. I know. Why don't we go back to those things? I'm with you. So, the king's men would be on the right. So when they had the Estates General, where they had this first assembly of the French Revolution, those who wanted to maintain the monarchy sat on the right because they were the king's right-hand man. And the further and more democratic and away from that would be on the left. And that's where you get right and left. French Revolution. The king's right-hand man, so I'm looking at it, the right they sit there, the left they sit there. That's all that means. It's more complex to say I'm right or left, but that's where this comes from. So, we're coming to Shays' Rebellion. I meant to have this appear and I didn't. So give me a sec. I'm recording. Yay, thank you for recording. Give me a sec. This is going to disappear in a sec. So, Shays' Rebellion would be on par with Bacon's Rebellion. This shockingly important event. Incredibly important. Western Massachusetts, you have all these farmers in debt, many of them veterans who thought I sacrificed all this and I get nothing. The system is rigged against me. So they're all farmers, they're all in debt. The government has created a situation where there's deflation and they can't pay back their debt. And if they can't go to debt, where do they go? Yeah, debtor's prison. I mean, the system is rigged. By the way, there's Shays right there. And Shays is right there, I'm sorry, that's Shays. And that's cheering on, beating up a tax collector. So Daniel Shays, a former officer in the Continental Army, Washington's Army, he began to organize people to fight back against this. Now, a term this would be on the frontier, so it happened in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. They call themselves regulators. And regulators are basically this. We are people who have no voice in government, and so we will regulate our own life. We will put control over our own life and not allow ourselves to be cheated. So we control that. Intense, highly controlled means regulated. Regulators. The word means a little bit different today. So, what they decided to do, we're going to shut down these debtors' courts. You're not going to put our friends or us in jail anymore. We're going to rough up anybody who tries to disagree. There's no police then. All the state has is their militia. So the state sent out the militia. We will destroy this. And what happened? Oops, they went backwards. What did the militia do? What kind of people make up the militia? The same people as the regulators. And they joined. And once that happened, Shays' rebellion became a major force. They marched to a couple different cities, took over a militia armory under pressure them, and we're going to march on Springfield, the capital. And the reason they're going to march there, they don't want to overthrow the government. They want the vote. They want to decide the legislators, so they can end the system that's rigged against them. And so their radical idea is, we're tired of being cheated. And it's hard not to see their point of view. They were being cheated. Is this the best way? That's a different argument. And so they marched. But what happened? It would be put down by a couple of things. Fall and winter hit, and they're farmers. They got to go back and do their crops. Men went home. Yeah, they want to change, but they got lives to lead too. They got families. They have no money. They still have their debts. But here's the biggie. In Boston, but also Philadelphia and New York, and all the way down to Virginia, they were panicked. And wealthy people throughout the states began to contribute money. And they would pay off a militia. And what kind of people did they buy off? They paid the urban poor of Boston to put down the now depleted Shays rebellion. So they used city folk to put down city poor folk to put down poor country folk. There, that's what I meant. And we'll see this time after time. During the massive wave of anti-labor union violence in the United States, it would be mostly rural troops putting down urban workers. Over and over again. And you see this in other countries, where they'll use rural troops to put down urban protesters. And it's just a very common thing. Think of the urban-rural divide here in the United States now. It's huge. I know we live in a metropolitan area like Helena. I mean, it's pretty crazy. But think of the rural folk in Townsend. Think about Montana compared to Oregon, or California, Oregon, or Washington, more urban states, and how just different it is. So with that, the rebellion was put down. They pardoned Shays, and he would end up moving to upstate Vermont. Partially because they were thinking, okay, we pardon him, that would end the rebellion. We're being benevolent. But you cannot believe the panic this caused. The panic this caused all over, especially the elite. And, I gotta see something. This would be, much like Bacon's rebellion, a massive class rebellion, and those with wealth. There's no really incredibly rich people, but the wealthy are terrified. What if that rebellion spreads to all over? To all over the United States. And we lose what we have. We saw a similar thing with Bacon's rebellion. They're already very concerned about the fact that the Articles of Confederation was so weak. And I didn't type this down, but please type this down. How about you write it? Let's write it. Is that better? The federal government, the national government, that's a better term. The national government could do nothing. Nothing. There's no army to put down an insurrection. There was a revolution with the U.S. and the U.S. government could do nothing but say basically, hey, you guys, cut it out. There was no power. What if this spread? Or for that matter, what if Britain decided to start blocking off pieces for themselves? This was a great fear. I'm going to use what I got. Most people don't have much, but. So to say this led to panic is an understatement. And their cry, too much democracy. And by the way, this is the anti-democratic or the anti-constitution and the sorry, the Federalists were for the Constitution, anti-Federalists, maybe ripping apart the country. But too much democracy, or as they like to say, mobocracy. There's too many people in this country who feel they have a voice. And if they have a voice, they might take away what I have. Now let's go up a year and a half. Doesn't it make more sense what Madison was saying about faction? What was their vision of faction? Shays' rebellion. And they're going to take what I have. Leveling, they called it. Too much democracy, get rid of it. By the way, I capitalized democracy, and I keep thinking I spelled it incorrectly, but I didn't. There's no correct spelling of mobocracy. Just go with me on that. But what they need is a stronger central government. They need a strong central government that will make sure that the wealth of this country is protected, meaning the people with wealth are protected, but also to make sure there can be no internal insurrection. That means we have to make sure that you people, the mob, aren't too close to me. You know, that's why I have these desks here to keep me separated, right? I'm standing so I can run away if you guys start attacking me. Which I can see from your eyes, you're thinking about it. And what do they want? As many barriers as possible between the mob and the government. So they wanted the mob, which meant the vast majority of people with very little voice in government. And they want to make sure that there are barriers. So those making the decision are far enough away that they cannot be influenced by the mob. And if we'll go through this. When the Constitution was written, there are so many barriers, it's kind of hard to imagine between the people and the government. Let's get to the biggest one. To this day, the people do not elect the President of the United States. They do not elect it. Who elects the President? This entity called the Electoral College. And in fact, there's no constitutional right for the people to even choose the electors. State assemblies choose them, to this day. And so that's, by definition, a pretty big barrier, isn't it? So when people all go vote for president, they don't vote for president, they vote for electors pledged to vote for the president, but the state assembly can just simply say, yeah, we changed our mind, we're going to choose somebody else. So, what they kind of want is an oligarchy. Just a few people in power. A few people who are smarter, better, and have more to lose than anybody else. Now, it could be rich, it could be a like-minded people, but a government by a few. And they talked about this, but they didn't like it. Oligarchy has this kind of bad connotation from governments in ancient Greece, is what they're thinking, we would become like a despot. But they talked, I mean, they were going this way. So with that, in Annapolis in 1796, a bunch of like-minded people got together, fearful, did I say 1796? 1786. Fearful of the weakness of the articles. In fact, the first time people like that met at George Washington's home in Mount Vernon saying, George Washington, you got to do something. So this is actually before Shays' rebellion. And their big issue, there's nothing to regulate interstate commerce. This is right after that trade war I told you about between Connecticut and New York. There's nothing to regulate this. So various elites, and now when I mean elites, we're thinking in terms of most of them were either plantation owners or relatively wealthy merchants. Those were the elites. And they saw themselves unified, even though in reality they might have totally different goals, as they will be discovered by the 1790s. And significant number were bondholders, including speculators who scooped up those bonds at 1%. And they want a strong central government to make sure they get 100% back. Which, by the way, a 1% investment, and you make, or you put down 1% and make what, 100% value of the bond. What percent profit is that? You know, it's only 10,000% profit. Not a bad investment, right? And what about the veterans? Hamilton was one of the leading voices here. Alexander Hamilton was becoming a big player in speculating and slavery and a few other things, making a lot of money that way. And Hamilton was saying, hey, we need a strong central government. Okay, what we really need is a king. That's what he wanted, or a dictator. That's what he really wanted. Going for a king might be too far, but a dictator. And so this is where Hamilton would start coming on the national scene. He was unknown. Why national scene? Because he spoke for these elites. And then Shays has happened, and everyone freaked out. And so in 1787, after Shays' rebellion broke apart, we call it today the Constitutional Convention. They didn't call it that at first. Met in Philadelphia, beautiful Independence Hall, like the picture. So you notice how I framed it in the trees. And I got that kind of wide look. That's implying I knew what I was doing. I just snapped a picture and I thought, wow, that one turned out well. I'm very jealous that people can look at something and take a picture and like, oh, it just turns out beautiful. Me, it's just pure random chance. I know you're saying, we've seen your artistic skills. You're all thinking that, aren't you? So, 12 states went, Rhode Island. Doesn't it make sense Rhode Island would be very worried about this, as they thought this is a bunch of creditors coming to cheat us. Rhode Island would be the last state to ratify the Constitution, and that was 1791, after Washington had been president for 2 years. And they're like, oh, we got no choice. We're stuck. Where are we going to go? We're Rhode Island. Rhode Island's a nice state. If you like seafood, that's one of many places. Like snails. Let's get back to snails and how good they are. Don't shake your, I see that, shaking your head about snails. They're mostly elites. They're mostly to the point of view of conservative. Relatively conservative. Now, think about conservative in that classical sense of we're worried about the order that was established being reversed and changed. And they wanted their law, they were sent, the articles or the Confederation Congress actually said, okay, well, in fact, they passed a law, got 10 votes, saying we'll have this meeting to strengthen the articles. So they weren't supposed to write a new government. They're just supposed to make a stronger Articles of Confederation to avoid the problems that led to Shays' rebellion. And so with that, the Constitutional Convention. When they started meeting, by the way, that's looking in, chair with the sun in it. That's another view. So I'm on one side, took a picture from the other side. And I told you guys about little Jeremy and how I wanted to throw Jeremy through the window. That's why I don't have children. And so with that, it's all Jeremy. So, secret meetings. They decided to meet in secret. And the big thing about meeting in secret, they're thinking, okay, we're here to strengthen the Articles of Confederation. No, let's throw the whole thing out and write something new. So almost immediately, when they said we're going to change the government, a bunch of members went home. So the only ones who remained, the 53 members that remained, and here are their pictures right here. Somebody just have silhouettes and I have a picture of them. The ones who remained, they were the most adamant to change the government. So a little like the Second Continental Congress, a bunch of them went home with the hit, oh, we're going to We're going to revolt. They ran away. The biggest patriots there. To one's most for change. George Washington, who didn't really want to do it, would be named the president of the convention, basically the guy who beat the gavel. Ben Franklin was there. Hamilton was there. New York all went home when they got mad, so Hamilton just would kind of pop in and out. We want a king, and then he'd leave. And Jefferson and Adams, the two main authors of the Declaration of Independence, were overseas. Jefferson was the ambassador to France, and Adams was the ambassador to Britain. So they weren't even here. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Adams was all for it, Jefferson not. Jefferson did not like this at all. And they claim, yeah.
What was Adams?
Britain, yeah. So he's U.S. ambassador to Britain. They claim to be impartial. We are not going to allow other interests to persuade us. Which, there's some elements to that. We're not going to have speculators or bondholders or merchants or plantation owners sway us. So if nobody knows what we're doing, we can go out to the city tavern and eat, and no one's going to harass us as much. Even though there's going to be a lot of whispering, what are they doing in there? But there's another bigger reason. Think about it for a second. You have a bunch of like-minded men get together and violate the law because they were just supposed to alter the articles. No, they're going to write a whole brand new government. They're going to make a new government and throw out the existing government of a country, a government that will benefit themselves. What do you call people who get together to change the government? What are they? See? They're traitors, and they knew it. They're committing a crime called conspiracy to commit treason. And they didn't want people to know. Isn't that kind of funny? Our founding fathers are traitors doubly. Traitors against Britain, and then as they saw it, we might be called traitors against the Articles of Confederation. Now, once again, one person's traitor might be a freedom fighter in someone else's eyes. But that's why they did it. And that's why they started calling this a constitutional convention, implying we were meant to write a new constitution. No, they weren't. And then right away the big issue came up. What about slavery? What about slave trade? What about slaves? Extension of slavery? And they knew right away, this will blow the whole thing up. So what did they do? The very rational thing to do. We'll worry about it later. Down the road. Let's not talk about slavery. Makes sense, right? Is that the right move? We'll see. Then the next big issue. Will there be an executive? And this was a fight. Do we want a tyrant? And the vast majority did. But they really did not want an executive that would be too close to the people. The first ideas were to have the executive would be chosen by one of the members, one of the legislative bodies. Nope, too close to the people. We want separated. We want to make sure the executive is really far away from the people. So we're relatively unique in the United States. The person who carries out the law is really pretty far from the people. There's a lot of steps to get there. Not quite as many today as there were then, but there's still a lot of steps. And then they all agreed on this. We don't want anything remotely like a true democracy or a kind of democracy where people choose their leaders, and they really don't want majority rule. Remember the number one cause of faction, according to Madison. They don't want majority rule. The minority will be protected. No mobocracy, or they'll soon call it king numbers, my personal favorite against democracy. And lastly, though, the federal government's got to be supreme. The federal government's supreme. So if anyone enters this union, the federal government is supreme. And if someone leaves, we can't let them. Everyone knows. If the federal government is not supreme and the state leaves for whatever reason, the whole thing will crumble like a house of cards. They all knew it. They knew it in 1787, and they'll know it in 1860 when South Carolina seceded. If South Carolina leaves, the U.S. is done. Because then New York will leave for some reason or something, and it just falls apart. After the war, South Carolina will say, we didn't start the Civil War, we were just obeying our right as states. No, you knew exactly what you were doing, and you said it there. So, there's going to be 3 major compromises. And let's get to the compromises. The first one, though, will be on conflicting plans of government. Remember, they avoided slavery. Slavery doesn't matter. We have a big state plan and a little state. Big state plan, well, there's going to be a few plans. They'll coalesce around the Virginia plan. Virginia, when I mean big state, I mean population-wise. I mean population. James Madison, a Virginian, he would be the main author of this, and that's why he's called the father of the Constitution. We don't know a lot of what happened because there were no notes being taken. There was no impartial scribe, writing down the notes, etc. He took notes, so that's kind of what we know from Madison, which is kind of biased because he wrote them for himself. But Madison's the father of the Constitution. He was friends with Jefferson. Even though on the classical terms of liberal and conservative, Madison was a little more conservative. He would become more liberal. And what they decided was a bicameral legislature. 2 houses. 2 houses. An upper house and a lower house. And you have, and they would be decided by population. Apportioned by population. Apportion means divided numerically by population. And can't talk. You notice how I crossed this line out because that's not what happened. That's what Madison wanted. So the bigger the state, the more members of both houses. But that didn't happen. So this is why it's a big state plan. So Virginia would have more seats in both the upper and lower house than Rhode Island. He also wanted the only thing that would connect to the people, the lower house would be voted on by the voters. But in most states, only property owners could vote, and therefore it would be the elite choosing the elite of the elite, and so on and so on. He also wanted the executive to be chosen by the lower house. The executive would be chosen by the lower house, and that was scrubbed almost immediately. If it's chosen by the lower house, voters have too much power. The mob, that's fairly close to the mob. So what do they create? Eventually you get to the Electoral College to keep the mob out. The New Jersey plan, aka the small state. Unicameral, 1 house. Each state, 1 vote. And an executive. Isn't this a lot like the Articles, except with an executive? That's basically what it is. So the New Jersey plan would protect small states. Unicameral. So by the Constitution, every state has to be a republic, and every state but one is bicameral. Every state in the United States has a House and a Senate except for 1. Anybody know the one state where it's not bicameral? Anyone know? It's the most obvious state. Nebraska. Of course it's Nebraska. Why else do they have all the corn? That's science. On that happy note, think of Nebraska. Who's been to Omaha? The most cosmopolitan town in the world, right? The crossroads of civilization. Why were you in Omaha? I've been to a cousin's wedding in Omaha. All my relatives in Omaha. I was born in Montana, but they all live in Omaha. Is that your only time in Omaha?
Yeah.
Well, you go back. Grace, why were you in Omaha? What's that? Now to stop in Omaha. And you didn't make it to Florida, you had to stop just staying out in Omaha, right? That sounds fun. Why did you do that? I tell you what you're going to do. It's only 30% off. If you get it to me before school, tomorrow will start with that. Not good? And I don't have a zero period. You have a zero period? So if she's coming before first, she'll be fine. Sound good? Start.
I have a dentist appointment.
We can do that here. I can share some.
No thanks.
I'm gonna sign, and I originally had it for Thursday, I'm gonna make it for Friday. Basically, that's the job.
Okay.
Sound good? See ya. Enjoy the dentist. Who here loves the dentist?
Vendettas.
The dentist?
Oh, they said
What do you think I said?
vendettas.
Who loves vendettas? I don't have to get Mr. Foucault, no. I like the vendettas. Thank you. That was good. Oh, I got a shot. Oh, I filmed that. No, I can't get it. This is the last warm day, it sounds like. Next week it's supposed to snow.
I got a free shirt today.